Okay, here we are again from a slightly different part of my room. Going through God's Undertaker, Chapter 2, The Scope and Limits of Science. He starts off by asking basically, what is science? How do we define science? It's a very tricky concept to completely pin down, but we all know the vague concepts about experimentation, observation, empiricism, that kind of thing. Lennox points out difficulties with some traditional views of what science is, such as repeatability. Obviously this would anger the cosmologists. You can argue that one, since the actual experiments they do, the observations they do, can be repeated. When they predict something that's going to happen at this stage, they can predict another similar thing using the same theories that will happen and then observe that as well. So there is an element of... Anyway, it's besides the point. He's basically criticising here when people say science only deals with the natural. Science assumes naturalism's a priori. So if you're doing science, you are only dealing with natural things because science can only deal with natural things. So basically, in that way, we can't then say that science only deals with the natural, therefore the natural is all that exists because the natural is all that's shown by science, because it's a lovely, lovely circle. And we do love circles, don't we? More about circles later. And as John Lennox says, this is only a downside if naturalism is false. The natural material world isn't everything that there is. So next he quotes a few scientists basically saying that when they do science, then they're only taking into account sort of natural processes and things like that, or they purposefully ignore any kind of supernatural explanations for anything. Lennox basically equates this to having a faith in naturalism or materialism, which, why, when he spent so much of chapter 1 saying that atheists don't have the correct concept of faith, does he then use it in this instance, the same word he spent so long fucking about with, and then just to say that, oh, you believe without evidence that naturalism must be true. You said it wasn't belief without evidence, why then use it in this? Stop. So he narrows it down to two kind of prominent views. Either there is no supernatural, the natural world is all there is, or if there is a supernatural world, then science doesn't have anything to say about it. It can't analyse the natural world. Which is pretty much where I stand on it. If there is one, I don't think there is a means by which science as we understand it can access that. I'm not saying that the natural world is all there is. I think it probably is, because I haven't been convinced of anything supernatural being supernatural. He actually likens this attitude that there is no supernatural to the churchmen back in Galileo's day, who actually refused to look through his telescope. Which is annoying, since basically Lennox isn't offering us a telescope to look through. There's nothing so far, and not through the rest of the chapter that I've seen, that demonstrates in any way a telescope by which we can view the rest of this metaphor, the supernatural world. So Lennox is dealing now with the limits of scientific explanations. He quotes Peter Atkins saying there's no reason to suppose science cannot deal with every aspect of existence. And this is important. Lennox says that this is the essence of scientism, but I'm going to point out the there is no reason to suppose part, which is basically Peter's saying, well, if there is a limit to science, at the moment we don't know what that limit is, which I think is perfectly reasonable. Lennox is sort of imposing a limit even though we don't know what the limit is at the moment. Or there has to be this limit at which science stops. He gives examples of what science can't reach, such as, what if we're having a look at literature and art and music and great things? How do we tell a bad poem from a really, really good poem? They always go for poems. I hate poems. This isn't an edge to what science can provide explanations for. This is just something we haven't got an explanation for. We might never have, through science, an explanation for why we like certain music, but certainly we know of approaches that we can answer that kind of question through neurology, sociology, that kind of thing. But to say that we will never know through science, that itself that's not a reasonable statement to make, because we just don't know that, do we? Then he adds in the obvious, morality! You can tell what will happen if you poison your grandmother, but should you poison your grandmother? Apparently science can't explain that either, but I will go with Sam Harris' point of view on that one, and going, well, what do you mean when you say morality? And Sam Harris is really the only person within this kind of discussion that has actually said, right, when I'm talking about morality, this is what I mean, and that is I'm dealing with human well-being. And then fine, from that kind of standpoint, you can then deal with the rest. People criticise him for saying, oh, why do you think morality means that? And he goes, and basically I kind of agree with thee. Because if it's not dealing with human well-being, then I don't know what it's for either. And since they haven't provided any inclination as to what morality is, other than what God tells you to do, then that's just a strange thing. But I think the whole morality, especially Sam Harris's points on it, are kind of a big discussion itself. Might leave it for later. He also quotes Bertrand Russell, old guy, dead now. If there's something science cannot discover, then mankind cannot know it. John Lennox points out this is a self-refuting statement, because that statement itself isn't knowledge gained through science, therefore how do you know that statement's true, therefore if that statement might not be true, then the whole idea might not be true, circles again. And that kind of sums up scientism when you say science is the only thing that leads to truth. Fair enough, that is a little circular. But which is why I hold to the more Peter Atkins quote from earlier, that there's no reason to suspect there is a true limit yet. There might be, I'm not saying there isn't, because I'm a fence-sitting bastard like that. Now it comes to the kind of the crux of the limits of science kind of argument. He calls this bit Aunt Matilda's cake. Basically, Aunt Matilda has made a cake, and he gets like scientists to come and have a look at the cake, and he says, explain this cake. And they go, and they can get this molecular structure, the kind of materials it's made of, the shape, the form of the cake, the colour, and all that bollocks and things. And then he says, but why did Aunt Matilda make the cake? And then suddenly all the scientists go... So he refers this back to Aristotle's four causes. The material cause... Hang on, let me read this because I can never remember. Material cause, what the cake's made from. Formal cause, the form the cake is now made into. The efficient cause, how Aunt Matilda made the cake. And the final cause, why the cake was made. This final cause, the why question, is something science can't touch, can't go towards that kind of thing. And so in this analogy, the only way we can know why the cake was made was to go up to Aunt Matilda and say, Aunt Matilda, why did you make this cake? And she goes, oh, something like that. And he, of course, likens this to revelation. Few problems, I'm sure you've spotted this. First, with Aristotle's four causes, they all kind of presuppose something was made for a purpose. He's basically injecting purpose into everything without answering the question, well, was there a purpose? And on the whole revelation thing, well, then we've got a problem. He says, I think quite rightly, that the revelation isn't beyond reason, because we can address things that have been revealed to us. Aunt Matilda's kind of what she says, we can address that using reason. If she says, I made it for my pet dragon, then we have reason to suspect that she might be telling porkies. If she said, oh, it's for my nephew called Steve, she has a nephew called Steve, and it's his birthday tomorrow, then yeah, we have reason to trust her. That's applying reason and not science, apparently. What we don't know, if she's got a nephew called Steve whose birthday is tomorrow and she says it's for him, but she didn't make it for him, if she's lying about something like that, then we have no way of addressing that. Revelation isn't a reliable kind of thing. We can judge it in the same way we might judge historical documents for kind of truths like that. But it's not kind of an objective method of analysing the world. You can't just rely on an old woman's say-so. And this method, her talking, he just says, oh, revelation. He hasn't given a mechanism of a kind of a revelation from the designer at all. I mean, in this example, if Aunt Matilda was dead, we couldn't ask her, then, well, sure, science stops at that stage as well, but so surely does everything else. And if we're going to say why was the cake made, yes, that kind of question applies strictly to Aunt Matilda. If we say, what is the cake for, well then surely we don't have to go to Aunt Matilda for that one. We can say, well, I'm going to eat the cake, it's here, therefore the cake is for my enjoyment, or I might share it with a friend, throw it at a leper, or whatever. Throw cake at a leper? So yeah, I'd see a few problems with that, I'm sure you do as well. Comment! So he finishes by asking, is then God an unnecessary hypothesis? And he uses a final example of, you've got a Ford car. Science tells you everything about the car, how it works, how it might have been put together, how the combustion engines and the lights flick on and off, and how to drive it and everything. None of this tells you anything about Mr. Ford. And he's obviously equating this to universe God, universe God, universe God. But we can't then say that there was no Mr. Ford because science hasn't discovered it. Fine. He's suggesting that if we say, oh, Mr. Ford doesn't exist, there's no reason to believe he does from what we know of the car, we're committing a category error, confusing mechanism with agency. But the whole point of what Lennox has done wrong here, I think, is at no point has he addressed how he knows there was an Aunt Matilda, how he knows there was a Mr. Ford. And if we were to question that, it would go, well, duh, because that's an example where, yeah, we know there is a Mr. Ford because we can got the records and he's chosen a car and a cake, things we know are built. All these kind of design arguments stem from this, from something that we already know was designed. If we did the same thing about a tree, we can analyse a tree, it comes from a seed, but then that has to regress through everything we know about evolution, abiogenesis, cosmos, and that just goes back to the first cause right off the bat without any agency whatsoever. So that's the weakness there. I think this chapter also reveals kind of his plan with the book. The central question, God's Undertaker, has science buried God? Well, I can answer that already. Well, no, because I don't think it's a scientific question as such. If there is a design of God that lives in the supernatural, then I don't think science can deal with that, if it is there. So he's kind of set up the question so he's winning already without needing to provide justification for believing it in the first place. So far, let's give him the benefit of the doubt. That's the end of that one. Bye.